In this next series of videos, we're going to discuss stress. What is stress? Well, by the end of the video, you should be able to explain what stress is and the different sources of stress, primary or secondary. You should also be able to explain the general adaptation theory of stress, proposed by Hans Seyle. Now, discussing stress can sometimes be very stressful for people. So if you are one of those individuals, please take your time going through this series of lecture videos. And if you need to, reach out for help. Here at OCC, we have mental health services for you. They are free to you with your student fees that you pay. You can call or text them, leave a message. There's also a suicide prevention hotline if needed. And then this number, as of a couple of years ago, 988, it is another hotline for you to call for suicide prevention or if you need to talk to somebody. What is stress? Please take a minute just to think about what you think of when you think of stress. So hopefully you thought of something along these lines. It's a response of the body to some sort of demand. It could be a demand in the physical environment. It could be a demand of something that's upcoming. It could be a demand of just something that you're thinking about. In other words, it's a reaction to a stimulus that causes some sort of physical, mental, or emotional tension. Now, when we encounter this demand, we encounter this stimulus, we make a primary appraisal. So the judgment of what potential harm this stressor could cause to us. We also make a secondary appraisal. We judge how well we can cope with the stressor. So the combination of these two is how severe that stress may be, or how long that stress may last. For an example, let's think about an upcoming tough game you might be in. And I'll go with an example of my daughter who played in PGF last summer. PGF is a big softball tournament in Southern California, and they played some really difficult teams with girls committed to LSU, Oklahoma, and Florida. Those are really big softball schools. So not everyone on the team might look at this and appraise it the same way. So we have this primary appraisal, right? We have to decide, is it a challenge or is it a threat? So one girl might look at it as a challenge, realizing they have a chance to face some really good pitchers and possibly improve their hitting. Another girl might view it as a threat, thinking it will be difficult to get a hit off of such a good pitcher, and the college coaches might be watching them and not be interested in them then. If we view it as stress, as a threat, we then do a secondary appraisal. So again, one girl who views it as a threat, may look at effective options. What can they do to make sure that their hitting is at an all-time high? Perhaps they could go get some extra hitting in the night before the game. Or they can ruminate about it, think that there's no effective way to get through this, thinking there's no way they'll get a hit, and view the threat as high. When the threat is appraised as high, that's when we start to feel stress. Now I'd like you to take a moment and do one of these stress scales. So the one on the right is more geared for students that are coming kind of right out of high school. It talks about kind of student stressors. The one on the left, the traditional Holmes and Rahe stress scale, is geared for maybe non-traditional students who have returned after a number of years of working. Maybe you're still working full-time. Maybe you have a family already. So pick which one you want to take and then look at your scores and assess it. And it'll tell you kind of, based on what level of stress you have, what's your risk of health-related issues. And just please understand that most students do fall in the high-risk category, and we'll kind of talk about stress as we go through, but also keep in mind that it's how you think about that stress that's really important. If you don't view stress as something that's going to harm you, and you think about it as something that's going to get you through the situation at hand, it's not going to be as harmful on your health. Now let's think about some of those sources of stress that were on those stress scales. So traumatic events, death of a close family member, death of a close friend, major personal injury, all of those could be considered traumatic events. Life changes, getting married, getting fired from a job, the divorce of parents, daily hassles, failing an important class, getting in an argument with a friend, change in financial status, and then job related, which I've already mentioned some of those. But all of these are kind of our sources of stress. These are life events that cause stress. And of course, there's other things. Like there's nothing here that says, school-related challenges, but that could be just a daily hassle, right? Of course, one of the stressors that students face is, making sure you have enough time to do your homework and study and do well on tests. Now, here are just some numbers on sources of stress. So 66% of adults would say that money is a major source of stress for them. 75% would say violence and crime, or the threat of violence and crime. 40% would have some sort of work-related stress. And then I'll just read some other statistics for you. According to an APA Work in America survey from 2023, 77% of workers reported having some sort of work-related stress in the past month. 57% said there was a negative impact as a result of the stress, such as some sort of emotional exhaustion or lack of motivation to do their best. Of course, don't let that scare you off about working. We all have to work so we can pay our bills, because obviously 66% of adults report that money is a source of stress. If you have a meaningful job, you're going to report less stress. 71% who said that they had a job that was not meaningful reported a higher level of stress than 45% who reported having a meaningful job. And then parental duties, 29% of parents said that it was stressful all the time. And being a parent is stressful. There's a lot of things you have to think about. You're not just worrying about yourself. You're worrying about these little people that you're trying to raise to be good humans. But of course, it is also very rewarding. So now we're going to go into stress and health. We're going to talk about Hans Seyle's General Adaptation Syndrome. So Hans Seyle, who many acknowledge as the father of stress, he was a medical researcher studying sex hormones, and he noticed that there were reactions to adverse physical conditions in the animals that he was using to research. He also noticed that patients with a variety of diseases shared similar symptoms to these animals he was researching, such as fever, loss of appetite, inactivity, and immune systems that were more active. He observed that several different adverse events, restraint, blaring lights, predators, caused these lab animals to respond with similar physiological reactions. So again, the increased heart rate, rapid breathing, enlarged adrenals, ulcers. And he noticed also that cats reacted to the stressors in much the same way, whether it was heat, cold, confinement. And he called this the General Adaptation Syndrome. The idea that threats on a body activate a general response to stress. And that's the same in animals and in humans. So we have the alarm stage, and this is where we have an increased sympathetic nervous system activity. And I will link a video to the sympathetic nervous system on the Canvas page. So this alarm stage is that fight or flight response you may have heard of. It's preparing our body for a brief emergency response. It's now also called the fight, flight, or freeze response. So if you think about an animal who's just come across a predator, they are going to do basically one of three things. They're going to freeze. First, they'll actually probably will freeze. They'll freeze, and then they're going to either think that freezing is going to hide them and that predator won't see them, or they're going to flee. That's the flight aspect of it, or they're going to stay and fight. Now, during this alarm stage, we have norepinephrine and epinephrine that's released. So these are neurotransmitters, but they're also hormones. And this is going to give you a prolonged alertness. It's revving your body up. It's making that heart pump more so that more blood will go to those muscles so you can stay and you can fight, or you can run away and flee. It's helping you're starting to breathe more again, because it's bringing more oxygen to those muscles so that you can have more energy to again stay and fight or run and flee. So that's the alarm stage. The next stage is the resistance stage. So in this stage, the sympathetic nervous system response starts to decline. And the HPA axis, which is the hypothalamus, pituitary, and adrenal axis, is connected. So the hypothalamus is a brain region. The pituitary is one of those endocrine glands that's also in the brain that's connected to the hypothalamus, and that sends signals down to our adrenal glands. So this is the dominant response to prolonged stressors. So that stressor remains. So, maybe you have an exam and you start to feel a little tense, your heart races a little bit more right before that exam, your heart's pumping, your stomach feels a little, nervous. That's going to be that sympathetic nervous system response. But if that doesn't calm down afterwards, if say after that exam you have another exam and you have papers to write and you have and you're processing this and viewing it all as a threat, then that might be when the resistance stage would kick in. So during this resistance stage, the adrenal glands are going to release cortisol, as well as other hormones. And I'll link a video on the Canvas page as well for the HPA axis that will go into it a little bit more and talk about what the body's responses are and how this is, again, also interacting with your immune system a little bit. And then we get into the exhaustion stage. So this is after a very prolonged stress has occurred. And you can see it up here in the corner here. You have, just good health homeostasis, the alarm stage, everything's still okay. That's preparing you to deal with something you need to deal with in the environment. Then you have the resistance stage, and it's okay at first, but after a long time, that gets you into this exhaustion stage where you have burnout, breakdown. You can see the little emojis up here. They're not doing so good. So that's bad stress. So at this stage, the person might feel kind of inactive, very vulnerable, have a decrease in energy. And this is because the immune system has been exhausted. So while the General Adaptation Syndrome can't be directly tested in organizational settings, it can be kind of a way to look through and understand the stress response. So consider an employee who works for an abusive and rude supervisor. When this employee first encounters the supervisor's abusive behavior, the stressor is likely to evoke a number of physiological and psychological reactions, which could be considered alarms. So this is the alarm stage when that norepinephrine and epinephrine is going to be released. Now, if this abusive behavior continues over time, the boss is always yelling at them, always giving them extra work to do, those types of things, the employee will attempt to cope with the situation in some way, maybe trying to bring reason to the supervisor, fighting back, or simply trying to interact with him as little as possible. All of these could be considered forms of resistance. So now we're in that resistance stage. You have cortisol that's being released. Over time, however, if these efforts don't reduce the abusiveness of the supervisor, the employee might develop kind of emotional and physical problems. Maybe they'll leave the organization altogether or start calling in sick a lot. That would represent the exhaustion of the General Adaptation Syndrome. So this is just a diagram showing you the two different systems. On the left-hand side, we have short-term stress. That's that sympathetic nervous system response, that fight or flight response, releasing epinephrine and norepinephrine. It's going to increase your heart rate, increase your blood pressure, dilate the bronchioles in your lungs so that you can get more oxygen in there, convert glycogen to glucose so you have more energy. And then on the right, we see our response to prolonged stress. This is that HPA axis, the hypothalamus, the pituitary, and the adrenals. And here's just another diagram showing you that HPA axis and how that functions.